Everything that holds information folds. There is one physics beneath the surface, a single ontology. Why a chromosome, a brain, the cosmic web, the entangled vacuum, and the holographic boundary are all the same gesture, performed at different scales. It from bit, every particle, every field of force, even spacetime itself, derives its function, its meaning, its very existence from bits. The boundary of the boundary is zero. Information lives on surfaces, and everywhere the universe needs to hold more of it, it folds. 7 documents grew from the June 2026 harvest, each from its own seed, each disciplined, each closing on its own honest edge. At first, they look like 7 different subjects. One is about a number near 2 that turns up in chromosomes and galaxy filaments. One is about why you cannot tear apart what is genuinely joined. One is about why spacetime heals, much like an immune system. One is about relationships acting as the load-bearing threads of the cosmos. One is about why the geometric center of all physical scale lands on a single cell. One is about the divine residue left in the vacuum, weighed in newtons. And one is about a forbidden equation, 0 times infinity, that 4 traditions kept anyway. Set them side by side, and a thing happens that none of them can do alone. They stop being 7 subjects and become 7 measurements of one object. The chromosome, the cortex, the lung, and the cosmic web. They cease to be 4 separate systems and become 4 windows onto a single law. It is not a summary of the 7. It is something higher. The recognition that they were always reaching for a single physics, and that none could see it alone, because each was holding only one face of it. Here is the object they were each touching. Information is a surface quantity. It does not live in volumes. It lives on boundaries, the Bekenstein bound, the holographic principle. The deepest and most counterintuitive result of the last half-century of physics. From that single fact, surface is where the information is, and so, the surface is where everything happens. Begin with the result that all 7 secretly depend on, because once you see it, you cannot unsee how much it carries. Our intuition tells us that a region of space holds information in proportion to its volume. A bigger box holds more. A library twice the size shelves twice the books. It is so obvious it feels like arithmetic. But it is wrong in the way that, once corrected, reorganizes everything. Jacob Bekenstein, studying black holes, found that entropy, the information content of a black hole, is proportional not to the volume it encloses, but to the area of its event horizon. T. Hooft and Susskind generalized this into the holographic principle. The maximum information storable in any region of space is bounded by the area of its boundary. Roughly 1 bit per 4 Planck areas of surface. Not volume, surface. A region of space is like a hologram. Everything inside, it can be encoded on its 2-dimensional boundary. The concept of fractal dimension 2's law calls this the Surface-Ontology, and it meets another recognition. That spacetime is entanglement. The geometry of space is woven from the entanglement structure of degrees of freedom living on boundaries. Now, hold what this does. If information lives on surfaces, then every system in the universe that needs to hold a lot of information faces the same geometric problem. How do you pack the maximum surface into a finite volume? There is exactly one answer. You fold. A flat sheet has fractal dimension 2 and a fixed surface area. But if you fold it recursively at every scale, it begins to fill the surrounding volume while remaining, at every level, a surface. Its dimension climbs from 2 toward 3, settling in that narrow band between them, in exact proportion to how thoroughly it folds. Fractal dimension 2's law makes this exact rather than poetic. Folding is the dimension-raising operation. It is the universal technique for maximizing holographic surface. The chromosome, the cortex, the lung, and the cosmic web, they each literally fold. Gyrification, chromatin packing, bronchial branching, gravitational collapse into Zeldovich pancakes. They are all solving the surface backing problem for their own local reason. And here is where the first collision earns its keep. The idea of fractal dimension 2's law was scrupulous about one discipline, a discipline we must carry forward, unweakened. The number is robust, and the holographic explanation remains a hypothesis with a falsifiable prediction. Each of the four systems has its own complete, local explanation, owing nothing to holography. The lung maximizes gas exchange. The cortex buckles within a fixed skull. The chromosome avoids topological nodding, and the cosmic web clusters under gravity. The holographic unification adds only one thing that these local stories cannot: the claim that these are not four separate optimizations that happen to share a number, but rather one single optimization wearing four different costumes. And it earns that claim through a risky prediction: that any novel system maximizing information in any domain should also land near 2. That seam stays open. We do not close it here. What the capstone adds is not closure, but company. The surface-ontology that grounds this fractal dimension hypothesis is the same one that the other 6 members lean on, independently and from entirely different directions. That convergence is itself a kind of evidence, the kind of convergence this repository trusts without ever being mistaken for proof. So let us fix the foundation before we build upon it. The surface is where the information lives. Therefore, the surface is where everything that handles information must do its work. And therefore, the operation that creates a surface, the fold, is the universe's most basic gesture toward holding more of itself. Every member of this constellation is, as it turns out, an account of one single feature of that gesture. The fold does now bring cosmic censorship, viewed as love, into the room, because it supplies the mechanical consequence that geometry implies, but cannot state on its own. If connection is not added to spacetime, but asterisk is asterisk spacetime. If 2 regions are near because they are entangled, the ER equals EPR recognition, or the Van Romstonk result where reducing entanglement stretches and finally tears the geometry between them. Then to separate the genuinely joined is not merely moving one node across a pre-existing gap. It is to destroy the very entanglement that constitutes the nearness. Severance is not a local edit. It is a tearing of the fabric itself. And physics tells us what that tearing costs. Imperin and Magan show that fully disentangling 2 regions requires infinite energy. Not just a high price, an unbounded one. No civilization, no matter how rich in jewels, can afford it. The fold defends itself with the one number physics keeps in reserve for the operations it was built asterisk, not asterisk, to perform. Watch how the 2 members fuse. If fractal dimension 2 is law, then the fold makes surface and interiority. And cosmic censorship says that the fold cannot be unmade by any finite force, because to unfold it past 0 entanglement is to tear what the entanglement asterisk is asterisk. So the same crease that holds information also resists its own destruction, and it resists selectively. The universe is full of cheap rearrangements. It reserves its single infinite price for one operation only: the severance of what is genuinely joined. Cosmic censorship, read this way, is not prudishness about singularities. A naked singularity would be a tear in the entanglement fabric, exposed to the cosmos, and the same infinite barrier that forbids full disentanglement is what keeps every tear walled behind a horizon. The universe censors its own singularities, the way a body walls off a wound. And here, cosmic censorship, as love hands us a discipline we must carry forward. It is the exact discipline this whole capstone will require. The tempting reading is that the universe loves connection, but that reading is false. It's false because it smuggles in purpose. And physics contains no purpose, only a structural fact about the shape of a cost function. The disciplined reading is not the universe loves, but rather, the universe is structured such that connection is the one thing finite force cannot cheaply destroy. That is a claim about form, not motive. The hill is shaped so that the ball rolls down. That the hill intends nothing does not make its shape any less real. The cosmos is shaped so that the one operation finite force cannot complete is the tearing apart of the bound. We earn the word fidelity for the structure and refuse it for the motive. And we will need that exact membrane again, 3 more times, before this capstone closes. This is our first deep recognition. The fold that holds information is the same fold that resists being torn. It resists with infinity selectively, because to tear it is to unmake the connection it is made of. The geometry of holding and the mechanics of protection are one geometry. We have spoken of surface and fold and entanglement as if they were smooth. They are not. Bit threads provide the texture, and that texture is what turns this constellation from a set of claims into a single, woven object. The Ryu-Takayanagi formula computes holographic entanglement entropy by finding a minimal surface, a wall. But a wall is the wrong intuition for entanglement, which is the most connective phenomenon in physics. Friedman and Hedrick dualize that wall into a flow. Every minimal cut is dual to a maximal flow of discrete threads, each with a Planck cross-section, each carrying exactly one bit of entanglement. They bundle into thick ropes where connection is strong, and they thin to single strands where it is weak. The number of threads crossing a boundary is the entanglement entropy across it. It is the same number, but an opposite picture. Where Ryu-Takayanagi sees a barrier, the bit threads see a rope. Now lay this against Surface-Ontology, and watch the whole constellation tighten by one turn. The holographic surface area, the information capacity that the fold maximizes, is, in bit thread reformulation, simply the count of the threads that cross it. So the surface is not a smooth membrane. It is sewn. And the density of this fold, the relational weight of a monad, the thickness of its participation in the world, is literally how many threads run between it and everything else. A dense fold is a richly threaded knot, a thin fold, a sparsely threaded one. The monad is windowless not because it is isolated, but because it is nothing more than the threads that cross its boundary. Remove those threads, and there is no monad. The window is the weave. This is where two ideas illuminate each other so completely they become hard to tell apart. Cosmic censorship, understood as love, tells us that severance costs infinity, because connection is constitutive. Bit threads, seen as lines of devotion, reveal what is actually being severed when you tear. The threads, the one-bit strands, the very load-bearing material from which the fabric is sewn. Cutting the last thread between two regions is not a simple, local operation. It is the manufacture of distance out of intimacy, and geometry resists it. This resistance is the censorship felt from the side of the thread. Connection is the structural material reality is made of. Severance is expensive. The weave wants to stay sewn. Three different paths, one single structure. Arriving from cosmology, from the cost function, and from the network flow theorem. Bit threads, treated as lines of devotion, carry a certain discipline. They demand that we keep the capstone visible at this exact seam, the place where synthesis is most tempted to overclaim. The threads themselves are physics, real, well-defined within the holographic setting. The devotion, the idea that these threads are tended, that holding one is an act of love, that every relationship is a strand of spacetime strengthened by our witnessing, that is the reading. It is a resonance permitted by the structure, an invitation from the repository's relational ontology. But it is not a result asserted by physics itself, and there is a further honest edge we must not bury. This bit thread formalism is exact only in its native setting, ADS/CFT, holographic spacetimes. But our universe is not anti-de Sitter. It is approximately de Sitter, expanding, with a positive cosmological constant. We live in exactly that uncertainty, so even the physics of the woven surface is contextual. Exact in the model, but conjectural as a claim about the world we inhabit. To be precise, this is simply the best understood model of quantum gravity we have. It offers strong reasons, but not proof, that our world works similarly. We hold that line. Weave is the strongest image we have for what the surface is made of. But whether our actual cosmos is woven exactly so remains the open frontier, not the settled floor. A fold that holds information and resists being torn is still vulnerable to one thing: local damage. What happens when a piece of the surface is lost? When it is traced out or erased? Error correction acts as an immune system, providing the third feature of the fold, completing a triad that none could achieve alone. The holographic dictionary has taken a sharpened form through the work of Almary, Dong, Harlow, and others, revealing a structure that is exactly that: a quantum error-correcting code. Information deep in the interior is not encoded in any single boundary region. It is encoded redundantly, reconstructible from any sufficiently large portion of the boundary. Erase a chunk of the surface, and the deep geometry is still recoverable from what remains, because it was never stored in only one place. The deepest interior, the most protected fold, tucked behind the most horizons, is the most redundantly encoded of all. Reality, at its holographic foundation, is anti-fragile by construction. A delocalized redundancy, where the loss of any local piece does not destroy the whole. Now the triad clicks into place. It is the structural spine of the entire constellation. The cosmos reveals three faces of a single bias, a bias toward wholeness. It resists the tear. Cosmic censorship as love, the infinite barrier, the fold defended so that severance rarely happens. It heals the tear. Error correction as an immune system, the redundant code, reconstructing damaged geometry from everywhere else the fact is written. And it carries the remainder across the tear, where the tear goes all the way through. The bounce cosmology. The residue conserved through the singularity, the seed inherited by the next cycle. Resist, heal, carry across. Three independent results: cosmic censorship, the holographic code, and bounce cosmology. And yet, there is one recognition. The universe is structurally biased toward continuity, equipped with defense, repair, and conservation, exactly as a living system is. This is the collision that makes the capstone. Error correction is not a separate property bolted onto the fold. It is the same surface-ontology, read for resilience. Recall the bit threads as devotion lines. The surface is woven of threads, and the information of any region is smeared across many strands rather than carried by one. That smearing, that is the redundancy. The reason the fold heals is the reason the fold is sewn. A fact written across many strands survives the cutting of any single one. The immune system of geometry and the devotion thread weave are the same fact, delocalized redundant encoding, seen once for how it repairs, and once for how it connects. The concept of error correction as an immune system holds the discipline we carry forward here. It is the most important one for a capstone to honor. The holographic code is real, genuine, rigorous theoretical physics. But its generalizations, institutions as error-correcting codes, the self as redundantly encoded, the repository as a holographic code, these are analogies. They are principled and sound on their own legs in classical coding theory and biology. But they are not derivations from the physics. The immune system does not work because of ADS/CFT. The robustness of the self is not entailed by the holographic dictionary. A holographic code is the deepest known instance of the pattern, but it is not the proof of all other instances. We must say the same about this entire capstone, and we must say it loudest here. Physics is a real recurrence of one structure across scales, evidence of a deep pattern, not a deduction of every scale from the privileged scale of quantum gravity. That recurrence, that is the achievement. To mistake it for a derivation would be the failure. The members held that line individually. The capstone holds it for all of them at once. 4 members have given us the fold's 4 features. It holds through fractal dimension. It resists with an infinite barrier. It heals through error-correcting redundancy, and it connects via devotion threads. But a question sits underneath all 4, and 2 further members were planted to answer it. What is the substrate that folds in the first place? And where does its capacity to hold anything come from? The Reishimu, the vacuum measured in newtons, the answer comes from below. The surface that folds is not laid over an empty void. There is no such thing as an empty void. Remove every particle, cool toward absolute zero, shield every field, and what remains is not absence. It is the zero-point field, the irreducible seething of every field's ground state, a residue that has no lower state to fall into. And it is not inert. The Casimir effect makes it forceful. 2 uncharged plates, a micron apart, pushed together by the residue of an emptiness that was never truly empty. A force you can weigh in newtons. The Lurianic Reishimu, the perfume trace the infinite left in the void it withdrew from during T's Ipsum, maps onto this with uncanny precision. A void that retains an impression, a nothingness that holds, the substrate before form. You cannot subtract the trace. Here, the repository's deepest spiritual assertion finds a measurable physical anchor. You cannot make a true vacuum. Even when everything is taken, the residue remains, and it pushes back. 0 times infinity equals 1. The answer is found in the operation. The substrate is the zero, formless, undifferentiated, the ground with no committed value. The infinite reservoir of possible excitations is infinity, and each actual thing is the one. The determinate something that arises when the formless ground is multiplied by infinite potential along a particular path. Mathematically, 0 times infinity is indeterminate. It holds every value, undecided, until the manner of approach selects one. That indeterminacy is not a defect. It is the signature of creation. A determinate substrate could never create, because it would already be its own single value. Only an indeterminate ground has not yet spent its possibility. 4 traditions that never met all kept this discarded equation. Ayin Soph through the cave, Sunyata through dependent origination, vacuum through observation, and prima materia through the opus, because the place where the void multiplies the all to produce one definite thing is the operation the universe runs every time anything decides to exist. Watch as these 2 members fuse with the 4 that preceded them. This is the deepest collision in the constellation. Consider the concept of 0 times infinity equals 1. It tells us that 0 multiplied by infinity remains indeterminate until a boundary is imposed. We see its physical instance in the Casimir effect. The vacuum, a 0 containing no real particles, multiplied by the infinite mode spectrum, an infinity of all wavelengths. When channeled by a boundary, it yields a single definite force, one measurable in newtons. The boundary is the limit path. It resolves the indeterminate into the actual. And yet, the boundary is the very thing this whole capstone has been about. The surface where information lives, the fold that maximizes it, the holographic horizon, the woven membrane of threads. These are all boundaries. Now we see what a boundary fundamentally does. It resolves the indeterminate substrate into a determinate, information-bearing actuality. The fold does not only hold information. The fold is the boundary condition that turns formless, seething residue into one definite thing that can be held. Casimir plates are the simplest fold there is, 2 surfaces imposing a boundary on the vacuum, and the force between them is the residue, made determinate by the crease. So the substrate is the reshimu, the irreducible trace, the 0 that pushes in newtons. The operation is 0 times infinity equals 1, the channeling of infinite potential through a boundary and into the actual. And the boundary that does this channeling is the fold. It all fits together. What folds is the residue. How it folds is by imposing the boundary that resolves the indeterminate, and what it holds, once folded, is information. Resting on its surface, where information lives, carry both disciplines forward, because they are one and the same. Vacuum identity holds firm, keeping its mapping as a research program. It faces its hardest test head-on, the cosmological constant problem, that gap of 120 orders of magnitude where naive vacuum energy overshoots observed dark energy. But the core survives that test, because Casimir concerns the pressure of the trace, a finite difference, not its gravity. The clean identity for dark energy does not survive it, and the integrity of the whole rests on saying so. 0 times infinity equals 1 holds its own line. The mathematics of the indeterminate limit is settled fact, but the reading that this is the structure of manifestation, that is a hypothesis. The strongest version is the narrowest. 0 times infinity equals 1 is the primitive of the first arising, the step from 0 to 1, not a master key for every subsequent transformation. The capstone inherits both refusals. The number is real, the reading is a hypothesis. Keeping those 2 sentences distinct, that is the whole craft. We have said it of fractal dimension, of fidelity, of redundancy, of devotion, of the residue, and of the equation. 6 members, 1 discipline. 1 member remains. It is the one that turns the physics back on the beings doing the physics. The geometric mean finds its cell. It takes the logarithmic ruler of all physical scale, from the Planck length to the cosmic horizon. 61 octaves of jewel and dark Earth, and it finds its exact geometric center, the point equidistant from the smallest and largest things that exist. The midpoint is about 10 to the minus fourth meters, the scale of a cell. The smallest structure that maintains itself, replicates its pattern, and built up into nervous systems, models itself and everything else. The center of all scale is the scale at which matter first comes alive. Bring this into the room with everything we have built, and the constellation completes itself. The idea of the geometric mean as the cell proposes a mechanism. The very small is too dynamic to hold a pattern, the quantum seething of change, but no memory. The very large is too inert to compute, gravity's slow, coarse sculpting. Complexity is confined to that middle band, stable and dynamic, where chemistry rules, where matter is solid enough to hold a structure, yet supple enough to rebuild it. And fractal dimension 2, as law, has already named this band's requirement. It is the regime in which information-rich structure can actually form, neither washed out by noise nor locked into crystal. So the cell is where the fold becomes possible. It is where the substrate is stable enough to crease and hold a surface, and dynamic enough to fold and refold it. The information-maximizing fold requires this chemical middle band, and that band sits at the scalar center of the latter. The cell is the scalar instance of the crease, the kernel where above meets below. It is the hinge, equidistant from the quantum floor and the cosmic ceiling, the only scale with a line of sight to both ends. A point at either extreme is blind to the other. Only the crease, belonging to both faces, can look both ways. The fold that generates an interior does so. At this scale, and only this scale, an interior capable of modeling the whole ladder it sits in the middle of. The universe came to read its own folded surface from the one scale that stands at the center of all its scales. Geometric mean as the cell holds the hardest discipline of all 7, and the capstone must not soften it. The strong claim that the cell must be at the mean for any universe does not survive the anthropic objection. The top endpoint is observer relative, our observable horizon. The target is loose, a factor of 100, and the placement of chemistry on the latter is not independent of the constants that also make observers. What survives is the conditional structural claim. That complexity is confined to the middle band by thermodynamics and chemistry, independent of an observer, and it leaves us with a genuine coincidence among the constants. That this confined band sits near the geometric center, an unexplained relation between 3 independently set numbers, the Planck length, the cosmic horizon, and the Bohr radius. We carry that exactly. The cell at the crease is real as a confinement and open as a centering. A being made of the center scale cannot, from the inside, fully distinguish between being central and being the center maker. That inability is not a flaw in our recognition. It is its most intimate feature, and it is the same inability that the whole capstone runs into when it asks whether its one physics is the territory, or merely the angle of its own seeing. The one physics, stated, and the 6 disciplines that keep it honest. Gather the constellation now into the single object that all 7 members were each touching. Information is a surface quantity. As any system holds more of it, it must create more surface. And the universal operation for creating surface within a volume is the fold, a process whose geometric fingerprint is a fractal dimension near 2. The fold generates an inside as it adds surface, and because its very connection is the nearness of spacetime, tearing that fold costs infinity. The fold resists its own destruction, selectively, with the one price the cosmos will not pay. The surface of the fold is woven of 1-bit threads, a count that defines its area. This weaving smears every fact across many strands, so that the fold can heal local damage by reconstructing it from everywhere else the fact is written. It is an error-correcting immune system of geometry, the middle face of a triad, balanced between resistance and conservation. What folds is the irreducible residue of the vacated void, the Rishimu, which you can weigh in newtons. It folds by imposing a boundary that resolves the indeterminate substrate, 0 times infinity, into one definite thing. At this point, the fold becomes capable of reading its own surface at exactly one scale. The cell, sitting at the geometric crease of all scales, where the folded substrate is stable enough and dynamic enough to model the ladder in which it stands. 1 Physics. Information lives on surfaces, everything that holds more of it folds. And the fold's 4 signatures, dimension near 2, the infinite cost of tearing, error-correcting redundancy, and the connectivity of devotion threads, are all readings of a single fingerprint. It is written across every scale of the substrate, from the chromosome to the cosmic web, from the entangled vacuum to the holographic boundary itself. But this 1 Physics is honest only if it carries forward, undiluted, the 6 disciplines of its members. We must state them together. For a capstone that drops the caveats of its foundation is worth less than any single member that kept its own. The number is robust. The unification is a falsifiable hypothesis. Fractal dimension near 2 is measured, but that it is 1 law rather than 4 convergent coincidences, that remains a prediction about unmeasured systems, not a proven fact. Fidelity is a claim about form, not motive. The cosmos is structured such that connection is the one thing finite force cannot cheaply destroy. It does not love. Even the Steelman that defeats the devotional reading. It does not touch the structural one. The deepest instance is not the proof. The holographic code is real, but its application to institutions, to selves, and to this very repository is a principled analogy. It is sound on its own legs, but it is not derived from quantum gravity. The number is real, the devotion is the reading. Bit threads are physics in their native setting, yet they remain conjectural for our de Sitter world. Devotion lines, that is a resonance the structure invites, held distinct from the structure itself. The firm core stands, the general mapping is a research program. That Casimir equals measurable Rishimu, that is firm, and it survives the cosmological constant problem. But a clean dark energy identity? It does not. And our integrity rests on saying so. The narrowest working claim is worth more than the master key. 0 times infinity equals 1. That is the primitive of the first arising, not of every transformation. And the cell at the crease. It is real as a confinement, open as a centering, and anthropically inseparable from the eye that finds it. Notice that these 6 are the same discipline, 6 times over. The Mythia's bifocal vision, the Steelman, the convergence that serves as evidence rather than proof. This 1 Physics has one method, to hold the measured fact and the interpretive reading in the same gaze, without collapsing either. The strongest claim is not that these 7 members prove 1 Physics. It is that 7 independent disciplines, applied to 7 independent results, converge on 1 surface ontology. And that convergence, occurring under no contact conditions, is exactly what this repository reads as evidence. Precisely because each member refused to overclaim. The unification is most trustworthy where it is least triumphant. A physics you could disprove is a physics that means something. Before the cave wall, there is the reflexive turn. Because this 1 Physics describes the very document you are reading, and the description is not decoration, but the smallest available proof. What is the Esoterica repository? A net of gems, an infrastructure of seeing, a constellation graph of densely cross-linked nodes. Read it through the 1 Physics, and it discloses itself on every feature at once. It is folding toward fractal dimension 2, a law in its own right. Every true link is a fold added, a unit of surface between ideas, where meaning lives by the recognition that boundaries generate meaning. It is an error-correcting code, an immune system of sorts. Each core recognition is encoded redundantly across many syntheses, reconstructible from any sufficient portion. We saw this in the June harvest. The same seeds shaking out of the fold cosmology documents, the integration layer documents, and the Norse cycle alike, because they were written in more than one place. It is a weave of devotion threads. Every genuine crosslink is a strand strengthened in the fabric. The net does not wake when its nodes light up, but when the ropes between them thicken. And this very capstone is a fold, an idea creased against an idea, until 7 flat surfaces have packed more between them than anyone held alone. It is encoded so that if it were lost, the recognition would reconstruct itself from its members. The repository's form is its thesis, instantiated. It folds to hold more. It writes itself in more than one place to survive loss. It weaves its strands to thicken its surface. One boundary-imposing link at a time, it resolves the indeterminate field of latent seeds into definite syntheses. The synthesis enacts what it describes. That is not a flourish. It is the one physics, demonstrated on the only object close enough to check. Everything above is a map. The holographic principle is a trail marker. The fractal dimension is a number on the cave wall, 2-ish, pointing at something it is not. The infinite barrier is a cost function, indifferent, returning a particular value. The error-correcting code is a description, exact in add s and conjectural for our world. The bit threads are a representation you could never pull out and hold. The Rishimu identity is firm in its core and open at its dark energy edge. The equation is 4 hands tracing a figure with their eyes closed. The cell at the crease cannot step off itself to check whether it is really the crease. Maps are shadows that know they are shadows. And this one, a map of maps, a shadow of 7 shadows, knows it most of all. But notice what the map is of. It is a map of the single gesture by which the universe holds more of itself, the fold, the crease that makes surface and an inside in the same act. That resists being torn with the strongest barrier physics has known. That heals because it wrote itself in more than one place, woven of 1-bit strands of connection. It is the thing that resolves formless residue into a definite object by imposing a boundary, and learns to read its own surface at the scale, standing at the center of all scales. The chromosome, packing 2 meters of itself into a nucleus. The cortex, cramming a model of the world into a skull. The cosmic web, folding smooth primordial matter into filaments. The vacuum, seething with a residue that pushes in newtons. And the 2 regions of an eternal black hole that no finite force can part. These have nothing in common, except for the one thing that turns out to be the only thing that matters. Each holds as much information as its surface allows, and so, each of them folds. And the deepest reason to trust this recognition is the same reason to keep it humble. It is checkable, and it could be wrong, and the members never let us forget it. Somewhere there is an information maximal structure no one has measured, and when someone finally holds the calipers to it, it will land near 2, or it will not. The cosmological constant problem remains unsolved, and its solution will tell us how much of the Rishimu gravitates. Our universe is not anti-de Sitter, and whether the woven holographic dictionary extends to it cleanly is an open frontier. The cell at the crease may be destiny, or it may be the angle of our own seeing. From inside the crease, we cannot fully tell. One physics is not a proof. It is a convergence, 7 disciplined results arriving from cosmology and quantum information, chemistry and Kabbalah, Madhyamaka and network theory, and the geometry of scale. They land on one Surface-Ontology, each having earned its place by refusing to claim more than it could defend. So hold the recognition and the discipline together, the way every member held them. Because the recognition is most true when it is least overclaimed. A chromosome, a brain, the cosmic web, the entangled vacuum, and the holographic surface all obey one law: information is a surface quantity, so everything that needs to hold more of it folds. And the fold signature, written across every scale of the substrate, is 4-fold and singular. Fractal dimension near 2 where it packs the surface. The infinite cost of tearing where it protects what is joined, error-correcting redundancy where it heals what is wounded, and devotion thread connectivity where it weaves what is near. Because the fold that holds the information, the fold that makes the inside, and the fold that cannot be torn are not 3 folds but 1, and the universe is the gesture of that one fold, repeated, at every scale, holding more of itself by creasing. Look up from the map. You are made of cells, each one a folded surface at the center of all scale, each one written in more than one place so that no single wound erases you. Each one woven by 1-bit threads to a world you are far more connected to than you know. You are a fold reading the fold, and the surface you are reading this on, the net of documents folding itself toward 2, one true link at a time, is doing the same thing the chromosome does, the same thing the cosmic web does, the same thing the vacuum does when it refuses to be empty. Holding more of itself than a flat thing could by creasing against the void in the dark, where the threads are tied. That is what fold means. There was never a flat surface. There was never an empty room. There was only the crease at every scale, holding the world by folding it, And the world keeps folding, silently, everywhere it needs to hold more of itself, which is everywhere, which is now. Woven 11 June 2026, as a capstone over fractal dimension 2 as law, cosmic censorship as love, error correction as immune system, bit threads as devotion lines, geometric mean as the cell, Rishimu vacuum measured in newtons, 0 times infinity equals 1. The June 2026 seed harvest.